So, the Nintendo Switch Pro has been back in the center of talks in the Nintendo community. Honestly, does it ever actually go away? But we got a little update from Bloomberg a few days ago, supposedly saying they had gotten some new info about the upcoming upgrade to the Nintendo Switch system, and the reactions I saw have been kind of mixed, and also, as always, kind of sparks discussions from people about, what they want to see in terms of, this hardware upgrade. What do they expect from it? So I wanted to discuss that today. What do we really need? Not just what I want, but what do we really need from a Switch hardware upgrade? Because, of course, people are always going, to the moon. Oh, I want to see 4K 120 frames in Breath of the Wild, and I won't pay more than $399 for it. I don't know about that one. So I want to keep things a little bit realistic. The big thing from this latest report that seemed to really get some people down was that it said that the display was going to be a 7-inch 720p OLED. A lot of people were hoping to see the resolution of the handheld display bumped up to 1080p with a Pro-type model. Myself, I think this is fine, 720p. Doing something like OLED will definitely be a noticeable upgrade, especially for the colors, contrast, and that. And we are talking about a smaller display. This is something I always talk about. When you have a smaller screen, the less you're going to notice stuff like resolution. If they can keep the games at a steady 720p in handheld, yeah, I'd be good with that for a Pro. Because really the issue I think we're seeing right now, because I think a lot of people think 720p and they're like, oh, well, that's what we have now. In my opinion, the issue we see with games like in handheld mode is when that resolution drops below 720p, like we see titles like Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. I think if 720p was the standard in handheld mode, games maintain a consistent 720p, you'd actually see a significant improvement in a lot of games, even though, the display resolution hasn't changed. Now, that's not the only resolution we have to talk about. There's also docked as well. This latest article, as many have for a while, mentioned that this system will have 4K output when docked, which sounds fantastic. Now, myself, I have said that I think the new Switch system will have 4K capabilities, but I don't think it will be the standard resolution for games. I doubt we'll be seeing Metroid Prime 4 be in 4K or something like that. Maybe some smaller indie titles, perhaps something like a side-scrolling Mario game could pull off 4K, but I don't think that will be the norm. More so, I think the 4K, if we do get 4K, would be for streaming apps, your YouTube, Netflix, Hulu, etc., many of which, yes, we don't currently have on this system, but hopefully that changes. I think having the 4K output would make the apps more appealing. That'd be a good time to bring your Netflix and that over, because right now, if the Switch did have Netflix, let's say, if I was playing a game docked on the system and, then wanted to switch over to a Netflix show, I still wouldn't use my Switch for it because I have a 4K TV. So I'd switch over to my Xbox, PlayStation, use the smart TV apps on the TV itself to watch whatever I'm streaming in 4K. But if a Switch Pro had Netflix with, 4K output, I would probably use that. It'd be nice to be playing Zelda or something and be able to quickly boot up 4K streaming on the same system, not having to, switch over to an Xbox, PlayStation, or something like that. And similar to what people did with the Wii U gamepad, I think those streaming services just in general really do need to come over so people can use their Switches sort of like an iPad and watch stuff in handheld mode. I know a lot of people did that with their Wii U. I think it would be the same thing with the Switch. Now, speaking of streaming, the thing I think would be the coolest when it comes to streaming is if Microsoft gave xCloud support to the Switch. We've long been discussing, at least I have, for the Switch to get some sort of Game Pass support. But even if it did, even if Microsoft did bring some form of Game Pass over to the Switch. We know the Switch doesn't have many of the games on the service, and just because, the game's on Game Pass doesn't mean all of a sudden you'd be able to play it on the Switch. But Game Pass allows you to stream a lot of those games to any device via xCloud, and I think it'd be pretty awesome if they put that on Switch. So docked, you could theoretically play like Halo in 4K on your Nintendo Switch. But better yet, you'd be able to play those games as well in handheld mode, just again like xCloud supports, phones. Now, yeah, it'd be through streaming, not the most reliable way to play games, and yes, I'm not a big fan of streaming games. I've talked about that a bunch in the past. But Microsoft is doing by far the best job with the whole streaming deal being included with their current subscription model. I don't know if you need Game Pass Ultimate that has like everything to get xCloud, or if it's just a part of the standard Game Pass. I don't know that off the top of my head. But I know the service and the games are included with the subscription, unlike the options we currently have. Crap like Control on Switch. Oh, pay, what is it, $50, $60 for an access pass to stream this single game? No, thank you. So yeah, that's something I think would be awesome if we get 4K output on a Switch Pro. And with all this talk of streaming, you need a stable internet connection to stream, right? I know this is probably a big ask for Nintendo, but could we possibly enter the 2000s and not require a freaking Ethernet adapter to have a wired connection on this system? Can we get that Ethernet port just built in? I know this is a huge thing. Every competitor has only been doing this for decades, but yeah, with a Switch Pro model, I think that'd be a nice thing to add into like a Switch Pro dock or something like that. Give it that Ethernet port built in. But like I said, I don't think this thing is being set to compete directly like with the PS5, Xbox Series X, having like big AAA games playing in 4K. I mean, could you imagine the cost of something like that? Those big, bulky bastards are $500 a piece. I mean, what would that cost to get comparable power into a handheld? Yeah, I don't know where people are coming from with this idea that, 4K is going to be like the standard. I don't see it unless the system's going to cost like $1,000. Now, I think there is the potential that we do get games on a Nintendo Switch Pro that aren't available on the current base model Nintendo Switch, which is another thing that people are very divided about. There's many people who don't want to see, a division, right, of the player base where you have these games that certain people can't access. But obviously, when you look at a lot of the, big third-party games, we're just not getting them on the Switch currently, and that's probably not going to change unless, they come to a more powerful Switch. Myself, I think that's very possible, and I wouldn't be too worried about Switch Pro exclusives, I guess. Because one, I think they'd be games that you weren't going to get on Nintendo Switch anyway. I do not think, Nintendo's big first parties, your Mario, Zeldas, and that, I don't think there's any way they just take the, 80 million install base that the current Switch has and just, start from scratch and be like, oh yeah, the next Mario is going to be a Switch Pro exclusive. We're not going to be able to sell it to those 80 million people that already own a Switch. I don't see that. And I think you will still get games like a Doom Eternal that come over to the Switch when possible, when you got a company like Panic Button doing the port who can make the impossible possible. But yeah, I could see them wanting to open the door up to like the Resident Evil games and that. The only issue again though is you are restarting in terms of the install base, so starting day one you're not going to have as many people to sell your games to. And as we see traditionally, even when a pro model type thing comes out, an upgraded system, people tend to still buy the weaker model because it's cheaper. So I don't know, if they did that, I could very well see a new Nintendo 3DS type situation where, yes, it did get exclusive games, but there were only like a handful of actual notable ones that were ever exclusive to the new Nintendo 3DS because, yeah, people wanted to be able to sell to those standard 3DS and 3DS XL, all that type owners. And I think we'd have a similar situation with a Nintendo Switch Pro, a new Nintendo Switch, perhaps. Personally, in terms of a name, I'll just say here, I'd like to see them go with Super Switch. I think the name sounds good. It rolls off the tongue, harkens back to the Super Nintendo days. If I was picking the name, that's what I'd go with, Super Switch. Which leads me to the biggest improvement I'd want to see, because it is, of course, without question, frame rate. Personally, I think that's the biggest killer in a lot of Switch games. You want to talk about stuff that's noticeable? When a game has frame rate issues, the entire screen is just randomly having seizures, I don't know how you can't notice it. And that's why I've said for a long time, I'd like the target for this thing to be 1080p, 60 frames per second for games in docked mode. Even still, every game may not hit that point, but I think it'd be great if that was the average, because yeah, personally, that's the main issue I still see. I was just playing the Monster Hunter Rise demo a couple days ago, and I think that game looks, beautiful. I think it's one of the best looking Nintendo Switch games we've gotten, but yeah, that frame rate has me worried. And this last gen, we started getting more of the, performance versus graphics modes with a lot of games, especially on like PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X, where graphics mode would typically be like 4K 30 frames per second, and the performance mode would be 1080p 60, and I much prefer the look of a higher frame rate over resolution when we get to this point. And especially with the system being a hybrid, obviously you're going to benefit way more if they focused on frame rate, because, in handheld mode, like I said, I don't think you're going to get much out of a higher resolution when you're playing on a 7-inch screen. So hopefully, in terms of frame rate, I hope they're focusing hard on frame rate specifically. Now, another thing I'd wish they'd actually work on with this thing is improvements to the Joy-Cons. I think there's some stuff they could do with just the build quality, making them feel a little bit nicer, but specifically, you guys probably all know the big issue, Joy-Con drift. I'd like to see a Switch upgrade paired with the release of some, at least better Joy-Cons that are more resistant to this issue. Like, I'm not expecting them to, 100% never fail, never start to drift. But this is such a rampant problem with the Joy-Cons we currently have, and the Joy-Con technology, we've been using it for over 4 years now. They should be able to offer us some significant improvements. Now, I don't expect them to come out and say, in a presentation or something, oh, we fixed Joy-Con drift, because that'd be admitting there's a problem to begin with. But they obviously know it's an issue, as they're facing several lawsuits over it, and actively improving the issue would go a long way, at least for me. Anyway, with that, this video's a wrap. Those are some of the things I really feel like we need to see from an upgraded Switch. Obviously, the focus is going to be on visual improvements, but there are other issues that it's high time we resolve. The system's been around for 4 years. There's other just quality of life type things we could be doing that may also provide more incentive to people, perhaps especially those who aren't as preoccupied with visual quality. But let me know what you'd like to see from a Nintendo Switch Pro in the comments. What would you like to see in terms of performance and visuals? But also, what sorts of fixes or other improvements would you like to see to the Switch? As always, I'm the Shy Guy, Johnny Zakari, and thanks for watching.